Venezuela's deposed president, Nicolás Maduro, has woken up in a New York jail after being seized in Caracas during a surprise military operation. Maduro is set to appear in court in the coming days to face criminal charges, including weapons trafficking and charges of narco-terrorism. Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, has said an unspecified number of soldiers and civilians were killed in the U.S. raid. President Donald Trump said some U.S. forces were hurt, but none were killed. He also said Washington would run Venezuela for the foreseeable future. The U.S. maneuver has sparked mixed reactions, but many Venezuelans living in exile have welcomed the intervention.
Across the world, Venezuelans poured onto the streets, like here in Florida, celebrating what many thought they'd never see: the removal of Maduro from power. Nicolás Maduro had run the country for more than a decade. Some Venezuelans watching from abroad expressed relief.
I saw what Donald Trump did, and I feel that as a country we are in a position where we need help from the US. This is how we can return to the freedom we had 26 years ago, before Maduro and his party.
Maduro was widely accused of running an authoritarian government, marked by electoral fraud, human rights abuses and corruption. But those celebrations are mixed with fear. Thousands in Venezuela remain detained for opposing the deposed leader's government. Amnesty International says arbitrary arrests targeted political opponents, journalists and human rights defenders.
We're very concerned what's going to happen. After all this that is happening, the uncertainty also, the aftermath.
Many Venezuelans like this couple say they can finally return home.
And I can't say how happy I am because I don't know any other government, only them. It has been so many years suffering. I have been without my family for 6 years, and I can't wait to have them.
Maduro was later seen at a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration facility in New York.
Good night. Happy New Year.
The geopolitical shockwaves are spreading across Latin America. Brazil, Cuba and Chile condemned the U.S. action.
Venezuela today, tomorrow could be anyone else.
Colombia has beefed up its security along its almost 2,000-kilometer long border with Venezuela.
There is high tension. This is a serious crisis. What's needed now is common sense, good judgment and humanity.
On the streets of Caracas, some Maduro supporters say his removal would only deepen the crisis and are backing calls by authorities to mobilize.
We're asking for the liberation of our president, just like many years ago when we asked for the liberation of Hugo Chavez. We elected Nicolás Maduro by vote. He's a president. He won the elections. Besides that, Trump is thinking that if he takes Maduro away, the revolution ends. No, the revolution continues, because we're not going to allow the people who tried to kill us to come and take power in Venezuela. We can't allow it.
For Venezuelans around the world, celebration now collides with uncertainty as their country begins a new chapter.
Let's bring in John Feeley. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Panama and a Marine helicopter pilot. Ambassador, the operation to capture Maduro was carried out by an elite unit called Delta Force. What can you tell us about them?
Delta Force is part of what we call Special Operations Command. It's a multi-service, meaning that there are Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force personnel assigned to it. Delta happen to be Army, who have usually gone through Ranger training. And these are the elite of the elite. They were flown into Caracas on helicopters that are piloted by a group called Task Force 160 out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. These are people who literally spend all of their time, A, operating at night, and B, in some of the toughest, most difficult terrain conditions. They are constantly training. They're literally, as President Trump said yesterday, the best of the best. And they are unparalleled in terms of their military skill.
Well, Delta Force helped the U.S. achieve their objective there. Is They're concerned that in quote unquote running the country, as Trump indicated he intends to do, that the U.S. will find itself in the same kind of nation-building challenge that entangled it in Iraq some 20 or so years ago.
Michael, I have to say, listening to the president yesterday and listening to General Kane and watching what few images we have from the raid and from Venezuela, that the precision, the power, and the professionalism of the U.S. military members who conducted that raid stood in high contrast to the imprecision, sort of chaos and uncertainty that the president and Secretary Rubio presented as the geopolitical future of Venezuela. The short answer is I and no one else really has a good understanding as what is going to transpire in Venezuela right now, as in President Trump's words, the United States runs the place for a while until such time as we can judiciously turn it over. This is all highly speculative, and I believe that the best way to sum this up was a meme that I saw yesterday, which was a drawing of a thoroughbred racehorse on the back, and the front of the horse was a kindergarten drawing of a horse, obviously by a small child. And all it said was, the special ops mission is the back of the horse, and the head of the horse is the political vision for Venezuela.
You talk about uncertainty, and there certainly is uncertainty at this hour. Viewers will come to understand that the U.S. wants to run the country as Donald Trump says they intend to do, and at the same time they're hearing that the vice president of the administration in Venezuela that the U.S. government has problems with has been installed as the president. How do you square these things?
You don't. You simply can't square these things unless you assume that the Trump administration has absolutely zero interest in a democratic future for Venezuela. Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president to Nicolás Maduro, who, by the way, we should note, gave quite the strong speech against Donald Trump, the operation, and insisted that the Americans give Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores back. That's not going to happen. Meanwhile, the president, during his press conference, said, yeah, Marco, meaning Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Marco's been talking to their vice president, and she knows what she has to do. So what this presents us with is pure speculation here that Delcy Rodriguez is doing what we call in Spanish a doble discurso. She's talking out of both sides of her mouth. On the one hand, she's telling Marco Rubio, yeah, don't worry, I got it. We're not going to give you any trouble. But, you know, I have to go out and say a few things for my people here so that we can keep peace in the streets. I think one of the things we have to look at is what does Trump really want out of this? And I think if you look at how he spent most of his time talking yesterday, it was about oil, it was about wealth, and it was about American domestic politics.
Let's broaden our focus just for a moment here. Talk to us about the impact this military action will have on the region itself.
Listen, I think if you take a look at the national security strategy that the Trump administration itself put out about a month ago, you will see very clearly the spheres of influence, political thought in there. I don't think Donald Trump thinks in those terms. I think he thinks this is our neighborhood, this is our backyard, terms that I'm not very fond of. But I think he looks at the hemisphere as sort of his turf. And in his turf, he is the boss. So the implications for the region are very, very I don't think that we're going to see any further attacks, but I do think we're going to see all kinds of pressure.
Interesting. That's former U.S. Ambassador and Marine pilot John Feeley. As ever, many thanks to you, sir.
A pleasure, Michael.
For more, I am now joined by John Polga-Hecimovich. He is an associate professor of political science at the U.S. Naval Academy, where he focuses on comparative and Latin American politics. John, it's good to see you. What's been the reaction in the U.S. to Trump's actions, especially among those in the MAGA movement who had fairly isolationist expectations from this president?
Good day. Yes. Donald Trump's allies in the Republican Party and his Make America Great Again movement, even those who kind of previously warned against wading into foreign conflicts, have largely rallied behind his actions in Venezuela. Politicians like Lindsey Graham have spoken out in support of the president's policies, and so far, kind of rank-and-file Republicans have also stepped in line. The pushback has been from Democrats, quite honestly, so far.
What exactly is Trump trying to achieve with all this?
Well, I think there's several interests. Clearly, President Trump spoke about oil and oil interests in Venezuela. It has the world's largest known crude reserves. And so I think that certainly is something that is attracting U.S. attention. I think the United States would like to have another ally in the region, even if it's a forced ally, rather than the what was the Maduro regime. And I think there are other things, including migration and issues that are also at play here.
When Trump says we're going to run Venezuela, how do you see that? Are we talking about the kind of nation building the U.S. attempted in Iraq some 20 plus years ago?
Well, that is the question. And there weren't a lot of details that were revealed yesterday at the president's press conference. And so we are, need to basically parse what the president and what Secretary Rubio said at that conference. So we're going to run Venezuela could mean anything from using Venezuela as a protectorate, right, with Marco Rubio as a viceroy of Venezuela, harkening back to the 19th century, or it could mean something like a two-layer regime where the United States essentially manages Delcy Rodriguez, the now interim president of the country, and the Chavista High Command. So that would be the way that the United States, I suspect, would like to do things in order to not put boots on the ground, for it to be a less costly and less involved, quote unquote, nation building effort than Iraq that you're referring to.
I wonder whether you can clarify something. Why is Trump not interested in working with the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who is also a big Trump supporter?
I think that's one of the biggest surprises from yesterday, is that the United States pivoted to the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, who is a hardcore Chavista, right? A hardcore follower of ex-president Hugo Chavez, and in some sense, even more so than Nicolás Maduro. But the United States clearly does not believe that Maria Corina Machado and the opposition have the operational capacity to run Venezuela right now. And I think it is because they do not control, or they have not been able to meaningfully fracture the military, right? Which is going to be key to holding down the country peacefully. If they did trust Maria Corina Machado, I think power would have shifted immediately to her after the 2024 presidential election, and it did not.
Okay, that is John Polga-Hecimovich with the U.S. Naval Academy. We appreciate your time, John.
Thank you.
For more, I'd like to welcome Elena Lazarou. She is a Venezuela expert and Director General at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. Elena, what signal does Donald Trump's military action send to the rest of the world, particularly Russia and China?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm a Latin America expert, but of course, Venezuela is part of it. There's a huge conversation going on right now in different parts of the world and different types of reactions to the US strikes. I think one big narrative that we see emerging in parts of the world is with regard to the legality of the action when one thinks of the UN Charter, of course, and we've seen these reactions from the UN Secretary General as well, and the President of the General Assembly. On the other hand, there is without doubt a debate and a discussion, an affirmation of the humanitarian violation of human rights and humanitarian crisis that Venezuela has lived under for many years. So we're seeing these kind of narratives evolved. But of course, there is concern, and one sees that in Europe as well, that the legalization of intervention without a UN mandate and also without the congressional approval could give signals to Russia and China that these kind of actions can be done. On the other hand, we've seen Russia and China clearly condemn the actions by the US president, and we shouldn't forget the relations that these two countries enjoy with Venezuela, the way in which Venezuela is a foothold in the region for those countries, whether that be through energy exports and infrastructure investment for China, or defense, energy, and other types of agreements for Russia. So there's that there. And of course, a wider signal is that the US, in many ways, is ready to implement actions that it has warned of for several countries, and that's resonated not only in the region, but I'm sure for Russia and China. Iran has come up, so there's a mix there of reactions.
How are the power relations in northern South America shifting now?
Well, I would say there's been, when one looks at the analysis that has come out of South America, what's interesting is that, and not just northern South America, but I would say the whole, because, well, Brazil spans the north to the south in some ways. So what we've seen is, I would say the reaction in South America is divided, not necessarily on north-south grounds, but on sort of left-right political grounds, so ideologically. And overall, several analysts have pointed out that it is the time for South America, particularly North South America, to assume its sort of strategic autonomy. That's what they've been saying. It's come out a number of times in the sense that preparedness vis-a-vis potential U.S. action that they were not expecting, but that is in the way nuanced in the U.S. national security strategy with regard to the way the U.S. wants to position itself in the Western Hemisphere, and so that they should be prepared to be relatively autonomous if that were to happen in their own area. And of course, there's a big discussion about what happens next vis-a-vis Cuba. But there's been condemnation of U.S. actions by a number of northern South American countries, Brazil included, and a discussion about what is this national security strategy of the United States, the first signal of which we're seeing in Venezuela with regard to Latin America, but what does it mean for other countries in the region who are not necessarily allies, as at the moment, for example, Argentina is an ally. On Argentina, on the other hand, right-wing government has welcomed this action.
You talk about the U.S. positioning itself in the Western Hemisphere. Might Trump be concerned with more than Venezuela? And I ask because U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio certainly hinted Cuba could be next. And for that matter, what about Greenland? Is there a guiding principle here?
Well, I mean, we did see, and this precedes Venezuela, although action on Venezuela was coming, and we saw the signs, and we saw, the deployment earlier. But it was the release of the national security strategy clearly pointed to this focus on the Western Hemisphere. In many ways, also, we should remember as ways of cutting out Russian and Chinese influence in the wider Americas, because that, I think, is a component we shouldn't forget about, that those countries where Venezuela in principle are seeing this kind of U.S. action. Yes, it's about, the drug trafficking, and of course it's about energy, but it is also about proxyification, or at least, the way in which these countries are allies of Russia in China, which still constitute major challengers for the United States. So other countries, I think, in the region are seeing the strategy, but they're also seeing in what ways their own ways of engagement with countries hostile to the U.S. could lead to this kind of to disputes with the U.S. and what other further action. And I think also it's an unprecedented way of acting for our recent decades. So that's also something that's becoming very clear.
Okay, Latin America expert Elena Lazarou, many, many thanks.
Thank you for having me.